Everyone, and welcome to Django Level 2. Now that you've reached Level 2, let's quickly review the previous topics from Django Level 1. Those topics were setting up projects and applications, creating views and mapping URLs to those views, using simple templates and tags, and then serving static media files. In this lecture, we will do a run-through of the workflow aspects we've learned about so far to get a quick review on all those topics. And we're going to be using the two project folders from Django Level 1 for Django Level 2. If you accidentally deleted those folders or don't have them anymore, you can always get them from the downloaded notes. Okay, in Level 2 we will begin to discuss models and databases and how to use them with Django. And we're also going to be discussing how to use the admin interface. Before we do that though, let's get started with a quick overview of Django Level 1, and then in the next lecture we'll get started with the Django Level 2 topics. I'm going to hop over to the editor now. Alright, here I am at the editor. I have a new folder called Django Lectures that I've been working with before. And basically what we're going to do here is just do a very quick run through of all the topics we did in Django Level 1. Won't be doing a whole lot of explanation, just kind of a general run through of the workflow you should be used to by now. So first things first, we want to start a project. So I will say Django admin, call start project, and then name the actual project. I'm going to be using the same names we used in Django Level 1. Feel free to change them. But here, I'll just call it like we did in Django Level 1, first project. So I say Django admin, start project, first project, and then I get a new folder here with first project, the project folder, settings, URLs, and then manage.py. Great. Now the next thing we have to do is actually create the application. To do that, I'm going to cd into that first project file, and then I will call Python, call the manage.py file, and then off of that I will call start app, and I'll call my first application first app, just like we did in Django Level 1. Again, you can change the name. And here we have first app. Great. And then what I'm going to be doing is messing around with the views.py file, the urls.py file in first project, and then also I need to create a urls.py file for first app, and then we'll also do some template folders, etc. But let's continue on. Let's create a view. So I will open up views.py, and I have from django.shortcuts import render. And we initially started with the HTTP response view, but we'll use render here. And I will call def, and we'll just do an index view. So at the request, and let's put a dictionary here so we can also practice those template tags. I'll say my dictionary, and then we'll say insert content, or whatever you want to call it, and then say, hello, I'm from first app. And then we will call return render, and into the render function, I'll pass in that request, and then I'm also going to pass in the first underscore app slash index.html, and we'll need to set that up. And then I'll also call the actual context to be equal to that context dictionary, which was that my dictionary file. So we'll save that. And the next things I have to do is set up the actual index.html file and then set up the URL mappings. We'll do the double URL mappings, basically create a URL mapping call in first project to go to the urls.py file inside first app. So I'll say a new file inside first app, call it urls.py, and then I'm going to say from django.configuration or conf urls import the URL function. And then I will say from first underscore app import views, so that views.py file. I'll create a list called URL patterns, and then inside of this list I'm going to have the URL function call, and I'll use regular expressions just to indicate that this is essentially at the index. And then we'll say views.index, so I actually call that index, and then we'll say name is equal to index. So remember this views.index right here, that's just, if I go to views.py, that's this function call right here. Okay, so I have the urls.py working inside of my application, but then I need to fix my first project urls.py to make sure that's going to call it correctly. So let's scroll all the way down here, and right now I have the basic admin, but I'm going to add to this, and I want to do it with the include function that we learned about. So I import that from django.configuration.urls. So I will say just comma include, and then over here I'm going to add in, we'll say URL, and I can even do something like first underscore app to take care of those file paths. Really, you can kind of play around with this. And then we'll say include, and I will say first underscore app dot URLs. So let's save that, and then let's also just add in the view for the actual index page. So we'll say R, and then I will say regular expression, those caret signs, and let's add in the single quote there, so that's all wrapped. I'll call views dot index, and then say name index. So that's kind of just showing what we did last time here. Let's put a comma there, save this. And what's nice about this is if you ever feel forgetful about these different methods here that I'm showing, you can just scroll up, and the Django, the default urls.py file, actually has the instructions. So it tells you how to do the function view, which we kind of just showed. This views.home, name is equal to home. That was the very first example here for the main index page. Class-based views, we're going to talk about that later on. But then we also have the URL configuration, which we just showed here with that include function. So anything with the first app goes to the first app.urls. And then next what we want to do is set up those template files. So I'm going to create a new file under first project. So we'll say new file. We will call it templates. And oh, whoops, I meant folder. My apologies here. Move that to trash. Create a new folder called templates. Hit enter. And then inside of this, create another folder that shares your application name. In my case, we'll keep the application name the same to be first app. So I expand templates. I expand first app, that way I can start finding it. And inside of this, I'm going to create that actual index.html. So I will say new file here, index.html. And there's my index.html file. And we can also link it to CSS or those static images that we showed from Django level 1. So let's walk through those very basic examples. I'm going to start typing HTML. We'll say hello for the title. And then I'm going to leave this. And inside the body, I'll put a heading 1 that says, hello, this is a test page. And then let's actually show how we can import some stuff. And since it's just text, what I'm going to do is say inside of this, we'll put it inside heading 2, create those template tags, and then call whatever the actual key was. So if I come back to views, it was insert content. So I'll come back here and then just put in insert content, save it. It's nice that Adam is helping me out there as well. And then the last thing we need to do to make sure this all actually works is we need to fix the settings file, or not fix, but add to the settings file so we have all the directories. So that way I know where my templates are. And we also created static directories earlier, but we won't show how to do the static file since it's almost the same as the template files. So we'll say it's going to be the base directory, and then we'll say templates, since that's the name of our templates folder. Okay, save that. That looks good. And then let's scroll down and make sure it's in the actual dir's key. So if we scroll all the way down, here we have dir's. Let's say templates, dir, comma, save. Okay, so now let's test this all out by actually saying python manage.py run server. So let's make sure this is saved. Come over here, say python manage.py run server. Hit enter, and we might get those errors on the migrations. It says views is not defined. Let's make sure everything's okay. Okay, that error actually makes sense because we forgot to just import over here in urls.py. So I come to urls.py, and I should have imported this. So I will say from first app import views. Save that. And now let's try again. It's performing a system check. What's nice is it kind of automatically keeps trying. Let's copy and paste this into our browser and make sure it works. I'm going to then bring my browser over. And there it is. It says, hello, this is a test page. Hello, I'm from first app. Great. Looks like it's all working. And what you will also notice is because we didn't actually change any of the content here, I also say, if I say slash first app and I hit enter, I get the same result. Hello, this is test page. Hello, I'm from first app. But the basic way, it still is working the same. I was able to successfully connect first app and the index page to the first app.urls. And what's basically the only view in that is this index request. Okay, hopefully that was pretty good for you as a review, and you have a full understanding of everything we just did. And I wouldn't expect you to kind of zoom through it just like we did right now, but hopefully you understand all the steps that we did. And you can see that even with myself running through it this fast, I kind of slipped up on that forgetting to import views.py, but other than that, it should be kind of straightforward as far as your workflow. The very next chunk of all of this is to actually connect models and databases and then check out the admin. All right, thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Everyone, and welcome to the Django Models lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be covering the main concepts behind models, databases, and how Django works with them. We won't actually be doing any live coding in this lecture, we're just going to be looking at concepts through slides. So make sure you have enough time to just fully enjoy this lecture and the concepts, and then in the next lecture, we're going to code through a lot of the stuff we talk about here. Alright, an essential part of any website is the ability to accept information from a user and input it into a database. Then later on, retrieve information from a database and use it to generate content for the user. We use models to incorporate a database into a Django project. And Django comes equipped with SQLite, which is a SQL engine. SQLite will work with us for our simple examples. We won't be doing any huge websites, so it should be totally fine. But Django can also connect to a variety of SQL engine backends. It can connect to PostgreSQL, MySQL, and all you have to do is just switch out the actual engine. And we'll talk about that later on. But for most of our projects, SQLite is more than enough. In the settings.py file, you can edit the engine parameter used for databases, and that's where you would actually connect to a different backend if you didn't want to use SQLite. Then to create an actual model, we use a class structure inside of the relevant applications models.py file, which we haven't actually edited yet, but we will in the next lecture. This class object will be a subclass of Django's built-in class, django.db.models.model. So basically, you're going to inherit from this built-in model class. Then each attribute of the class represents a field, which is just like a column name with constraints in SQL. This will all feel very natural if you already have some SQL experience. But in case you don't, let's quickly review what a SQL database looks like. And if you already have SQL experience, you can just kind of fast forward through this little explanation. Okay, so basically SQL operates like a giant table. If you're familiar with Excel or spreadsheets in general, SQL operates in a very similar fashion, with each column representing a field and each row representing an individual entry or data point. So here we can see a table has a website ID, a website name, and then a URL. So each column has a type of field as well, such as a character field, an integer field, or a date field. And each field can also have constraints. So here we have website ID, and that's an integer field. Then we have website name, that's a character field, etc. And for those kind of constraints, for example, the character field should have a max length constraint, indicating the maximum number of characters allowed. So you have the type of field and then constraints on that field. The last thing to note is table, or models with Django, the relationships between them, and often models will reference each other. For this referencing to work, we use the concepts of foreign keys and primary keys. So let's show an example. Imagine we now have two models, which are essentially two databases. One to store website information, and another to store date information. So here on the left, we have the website ID, the website name, and the URL. On the right, we have the corresponding website ID, and then date accessed. So we could say that the website ID column is a primary key in the left table, and a foreign key in the right table. A primary key is a unique identifier for each row in a table. A foreign key just denotes that the column coincides with a primary key of another table. Later on, we're going to move on to discuss things like one-to-one or many-to-many relationships. But for now, this is all we really need to know. That should be enough for our understanding of models in Django and just a general quick overview of what SQL kind of looks like as a concept. Now let's show an example of the models class that would go into the models.py file of your application. So as I mentioned, we have these model classes and they inherit from Django's built-in models.model class. So let's imagine we have a topic model. We would have the class topic, and then we can say top name is going to be models dot the type of field, character field, and then as arguments you pass in these parameters that are constraints. So we say what the max length is. Does every topic name have to be true, or unique, I should say? And we can set that unique equal to true. Then we have, let's say, another model for a web page, and essentially each of these classes is going to act like a table in your database. And then we have category, name, URL, and then we say models.foreign key, the character field, the URL field, so those are all different fields, and then you can pass in parameters. But note here how the category equals to models.foreign key, and then we pass in topic there, because that's going to be a foreign key from the topics model. Then we can have a web page model where we have the topic, again it's a foreign key, the name, which is a character field, and then URL models.url field. And we can then have a specific method to return the actual name. So if you say print web page, it grabs the name. And after we set up the models, we can migrate the database. So don't worry if you didn't fully understand that code. In the next lecture, we're going to be coding and explaining it a lot more. So again, when we actually set up the models, we can migrate the database, and this basically lets Django do the heavy lifting of creating SQL databases that correspond to the models we created. And this is the part that's really cool about Django. You can just write up those classes, and then with a very simple command, Django is going to do all the heavy lifting of creating a SQL database that corresponds to that model. Django can do this entire process with just a simple command, python manage.py migrate, which we talked about earlier in the course when we got a warning from Django telling us to do this migrate call. But now, since we actually are going to work with models, we can do it. After that, we then register the changes to our app, shown here with some generic app1. So we would say python manage.py make migrations, and then your application name, app1, first app, whatever you happen to call it. We then migrate the database one more time, python manage.py migrate, and then later on we can actually use the shell from the manage.py file to play around with the models, and we'll show you how to do that as well. So in order to use the more convenient admin interface with the models, however, we need to register them to our application's admin.py file. And we can do this with the following code. We say from django.contrib import admin, and then from app.models, or whatever app happens to be named, you import the actual models, model 1, model 2. In those previous examples, that would be things like topic or web page, date accessed, etc. And then we say admin.site.register, and you pass in the model as an argument. Then with the models in the database created, we can use Django's fantastic admin interface to interact with the database. And this is something that's really cool and awesome about Django. It's one of the key features. The fact that once you set up these databases, Django is going to do all the heavy lifting to create those models into databases, and you're going to have a full admin interface. So we'll show you how to log in to the admin interface, and then you can read what's going on in the models. So in order to fully use the database and the admin, we're going to need to create a super user. And we can do this with the following command, python manage.py create super user. And then you're asked to provide a name, email, and password. So remember, when we actually are coding through this in the next lecture or the next couple of lectures, that you're going to have to remember or write down the name, email, and password you provide for this super user. Okay, then once we've set up the models, it's always a good idea to populate them with some test data. And we're going to be using a library to help with this called Faker, which produces fake data, and we'll create a script to do this as well. All right, I know I've been talking a lot and we've discussed a ton. Don't worry if you didn't actually understand how to implement all that stuff, but hopefully you did get a general idea of how the Django models, the databases, and the admin interface kind of connect with each other. In the next lecture and the next few lectures, we're going to be coding through an example of all of this to really help your understanding. Okay, thanks everyone, and I'm excited to get to the next lecture because we're really going to see the power of Django coming up with the models. Thanks, and I'll see you there. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Creating Models lecture for Django Level 2. We covered a lot of concepts in the previous lecture, so let's actually start implementing them. And in order to do that, we are going to continue working with the 2 project folders from Django Level 1. If you don't have those, you can always download them from the course notes. Okay, let's start making some models. I'm going to hop over to the editor and open up the first project folder now. Okay, here I am at the editor, and I have my file structure, Django Level 1, and I have the 2 projects from Django Level 1, Pro 2 and First Project. So you can open those up, and what I want you to do is inside of First App, open up the models.py file. And you should have somewhere in that models.py file from django.db import models. And if you don't have that for some reason, go ahead and type that in. And now what we're going to do is using object-oriented programming, we'll create models with Django. So models, as we discussed in the previous lecture, are just classes. And then we give the actual name. You can kind of relate these to the name of the table inside the database. And then we'll actually inherit from models.model. So that's the base class. So we're going to have this topic be a derived class. And then this class object attribute, top_name, is going to be equal to models dot, and then we actually have to specify what kind of field it's going to be. This is going to be a character field for the actual topic. And then we'll say max length is equal to 264. So max length is a constraint of this character field. It's really up to you what value you choose for the maximum length Obviously, you should have some maximum length, otherwise your users are going to be able to put as many characters as they want and you'll have to save them. 264 for a topic name, it's probably overkill, but that's totally fine. Then we can say unique, which is a parameter to require as a constraint that all the topics be unique, meaning you can't have duplicates in there. So we'll say that's true as well. And then usually you'll also want to have some sort of string representation of your model. So if you ever have to print out an instance of topic, you'll be able to do that without any error. So we know that there's a special method for that from the object-oriented programming sections, and that's just the str. And then we're going to say return self.topName. Great. Now let's create two more models. We'll create a web page, models.model. And then we'll create three class object attributes here, the topic, and these are essentially the columns inside the table web page. And this will be a foreign key because we're going to grab from topic, which makes sense. And then we have name, which is going to be models dot, and this will be a character field. And we'll give this as well a max length. Set that equal to 264. 264.128, that's totally fine, whatever you want. And I also want to specify the unique constraint here to be true. And then finally, I'm going to have URL be equal to models.URL field. And I also want this to be unique. So you can always visit the documentation of Django for the actual available fields, but we're definitely going to be showing you the most common ones as we continue on through this course. Things like integer fields, date fields, etc. So just keep that in mind. And then we also want some sort of string representation here. Pass in self, and I'm going to say return self dot, and we'll return the name of the web page as its string representation. Finally, let's create an access record class. And this will also inherit from models.model. And what this access record class is going to be is we'll say the name of models.foreign-key. And then what we will do is pass in web page. And we're also going to have a date field. When was it actually accessed? So the date column will be models.a date field. No extra constraints there. And then if I want a string representation of this, I'll say str, self, and then I'm going to just pass the actual date. So I'll return self.date. But unfortunately, since this is a date time object, it needs to be casted as a string. And if you're ever unsure if one of these fields is going to be able to just simply be represented as a string, you can always just cast it using the str built-in function. Okay, so looks like all our models are ready. Now it's time to actually create the SQL databases behind these models. And this is what the real power of Django is all you have to do is define classes here, and Django's going to take care of the rest of actually building out that SQL database for you. And we do that through a series of commands. The first one we need to do is to actually initiate this entire process. In that project folder, I will call Python manage.py and then call migrate. Hit enter, and you should see running migrations. And if you've already run this, if you run it twice, you'll see no migrations to apply. I accidentally already ran it before I filmed this, so it says no migrations. For you, it will say something else if you haven't run this already. Then the next thing you have to do is register the changes to your application. So what we will do here is say Python manage.py, and we call make migrations. Let me make sure I spelled that right. Yep. Make migrations, and then the name of your application. In our case, it's simple, it's just first app. We'll hit enter, and you'll see some other things. Now, I got no changes detected in app first app because I already ran this. Again, you'll get something else. It'll say something like creating model, etc. And after you've done that, you need to run Python make manage.py migrate one more time. So we'll say Python manage.py migrate one more time. And for me, it says no migrations to apply. You'll probably get something different since you'll be running it for the first time. So those three commands, this one, Python manage.py, then Python manage.py make migrations, your application name, and then again, Python manage.py migrate. And now our models should be ready and connected to a SQL database that Django just created for us and register the changes to our application. And now the question arises, well, how do you actually confirm that all of this worked, and how do you actually interact with that database? Well, we'll show you the most simple and basic way, and that's to create some test data with some shell commands. So using Python at the shell, we can actually interact with our database. And this is how I'm going to do that. I will call Python manage.py shell. And this will open up an interactive console for me. I'm using Python 3.5 here. You're probably using Python 3.6. That's totally fine. Either one should work. And I'm going to collapse that tree so we can see a little more here. And whoops, it's not what I meant to do. Okay, let's come back down to the console. Here we go. Now, to make sure everything's working, I'm just going to print hello. I should get hello back. And good, Python's working fine. What we will do is we'll say from first_app.models. So this is the models.py file I have open right here from that first app folder. Import topic. So actually import an instance, or import that class so we can work with it. And that worked fine. If you get an error here, it's probably because you forgot to do the migration command, so keep that in mind. And then we can say print topic.objects.all, close parentheses. And if I run this, this will actually print all the objects in that topic model or topic table. You'll get nothing back the first time, so let's create something. We'll say t is equal to an instance of topic, and we'll say the top name. So the topic name is the social network. So maybe a couple websites fall under social networks, things like Instagram, Facebook. I don't know if anyone's still on MySpace, but you get the idea. I'll hit enter here, and then to actually save this change, I say t.save, and that's a method that we inherit from the models.model class. So I hit enter. Now it's saved. So if I run that previous command of print topic.objects.all, I get back query set topic social network. Great. So I actually was able to affect all of this, and now I'm going to quit. So far we've created models, and we've created the databases behind them, and we actually used shell commands to add something. Now, we're definitely not going to be using the shell every time we want to add something or view our model or get an idea of what the database actually contains. In order to use more convenience, we use the admin interface. And this is, again, a really awesome feature of Django. It's going to have a fully developed admin interface with very little work from us. But in order to have the admin interface with the models, we need to register them to our application's admin.py file. So let's show you how we can do that. I'm going to open up the directory tree here, and I have my application folder, and inside of that I see admin.py. And it looks something like this: from django.contrib, import admin, and it says register your models here. So I need to basically tell my application that my models exist. So I'll say from, and then you put in the name of your application. So in my case, it's first app.models, so that models.py file, import, and then I'm going to import all the models. So that's access record, that's topic, and Adam should be helping you out here. And then the last one was called web page, I believe. There we go. Great. And then it's time to register them. And the way you register them is from that admin.site.register. And it should be lowercase. And then we pass in the actual model. So we can start with access record. And then we'll do this a couple more times for the other two models. We'll say register topic, and then admin.site.register register, and then finally web page. Okay, so these are registered and ready to be used with the admin interface. In order to actually fully use the database with the admin interface, I need to create a super user. That way, not just any Joe Schmo can come in and start messing around with our database. Only people who were creating the website and had access to all of this information could create a super user. And we can do that with the following. So under first project, I'm going to say Python manage.py, and then we say create super user. And then later from the admin interface, you can create more super users or give people more permissions. But we have to create at least one super user here from this command line. So we'll create a super user, and we need to have a username, a password, and an email address. Now it's totally up to you what you want to provide here as your username, email, and password. Just really make sure that you remember them or write them down somewhere. Otherwise you'll have to repeat this entire create super user process. So I'm going to say my username is Jose, email address, let's say training@payariandata.com, and then my password, I'll just say TESTPASSWORD, test password. It won't let you do super weak passwords, so keep that in mind. This one that I'm typing in is really weak, just test password, but I don't really care since I'm never actually going to launch this website. All right, so I created a super user. Now it's time to actually use that super user with the admin interface. And let's do that by actually running the server and checking out that admin interface in our browser. So I'll say Python manage.py, run server, hit enter, and hopefully we have no errors. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste this and jump to my browser. Okay, so here I am at my browser. If you did everything correctly, you shouldn't notice anything on the front end change. You still get this picture of Django himself. But if you say /admin and hit enter, now you get a login where you can provide your username and then your password. So let's provide our password. In my case, it was really weak. Test password. Hit login. And now this is what the Django admin page looks like. And this was all done automatically for you by Django. The SQL databases were created for you. This admin page was created for you with just those few lines of code. And I know right now it may seem like you had to do a lot of work to get all of this, but once you feel really comfortable with Django, this is going to feel like magic every time. It still amazes me every time that Django does this all for you automatically. So this is really, really awesome. Okay, so if we check out topics, I can actually click on topics here. And I see that I have my topic, social network. And then I can click on that, I can delete it, I can save, add another, save and continue editing, go to history of this, come back to first app, topics, come see something else, access records. Right now I have 0 access records. I can manually add in an access record, so that's pretty cool as well. So let's say I go to web pages, and instead of using shell commands, I could click here, add a web page. I select the topic. I can either click plus here to add another topic, or select from existing topics. Remember, this is a foreign key into another table, so it's a drop-down menu. Social network, and then we can give it a name. So this web page can be something like Google, and the URL will be something like www.google.com. And then we're just going to say save, and now I have a web page. Great. And now you can see how we can use Django admin to create and access records. Now you also see just how powerful the admin interface and why only certain people should have authentication and authorization to access this page. If someone else maliciously accesses this page, they can do a lot of damage to your website. So again, this is super important that you protect access to this admin page. This essentially gives you control over the entire site. And later on in the course, we'll discuss users, groups, permissions, a lot more. But we can see here there's already an authentication authorization application for us. You can check out users. Right now we only have Jose, that's me, but maybe you're working with other people in your company and you want to add permissions. You can eventually add users from here. So you can say add a user, their username, password, password confirmation, etc. So again, Django admin interface, a lot of power here. You got to keep this safe. Okay, so that's it for now. Coming up next, we're going to continue talking about Django models and a lot more. And we'll also show you how to actually use the library Faker to populate your databases. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. And welcome to the Populating Models lecture. It's usually a good idea to create some sort of script that will populate your models with some dummy data, that is, fake data. Let's show you how you can use the Faker library to create this sort of script. I'm going to hop over to the editor now. Okay, so here I'm open at the editor, and the first thing we need to do is to actually install the Faker library. And you can do that with a simple pip install, and make sure you're in the correct virtual environment before you do this, but you'll say pip install, and then with a capital F, AKER, hit enter, and this should pip install the Faker Python library for you. And it's a pretty quick download, so it shouldn't take that much time. Alright, looks like it's finished installing for me, so that's all we need to do for that. Okay, let me quickly show you what the documentation for Faker looks like. You can just come to faker.readthedocs.io and then check out the master link here. But it just shows you the basic usage of Faker. I can kind of zoom in here. Basically what you end up doing is after you pip install Faker, you say from Faker import factory, or from Faker import Faker. That's the way we're going to do it. And then you just say fake is an instance of Faker class, and you can call different methods off of it. Create a fake name, create a fake address, create some fake text, etc. And they have tons of methods here, so you can check out the documentation for all the various methods. If you click down here on providers, it shows you things like fake credit card, fake date time, fake internet address, person, Python files, etc. So let's show you how you can use this library, Faker, to actually create some fake data to populate our models with. So inside of my top level first project folder, I'm going to right click and create a new file. And it's kind of up to you where you want to save the population script. I usually save it on the top level file. So again, it's up to you, but we'll call it populate underscore first underscore app.py. And we'll have it open here. Let's minimize some of this stuff so we get a little more room to read this. And then I'm going to say import OS. And then I'm going to need to configure the settings for the project. And I actually need to run this before I call any code. So I need to say os.environ for the environment. And I'm going to set the default. And then I'm going to pass in all caps, Django settings underscore module. And then set it equal to, or pass in as a second parameter, first underscore project dot settings. And basically what this is doing is just configuring the settings for the project. And you need to do this before you start manipulating the actual models. Then from here, we can import Django and then set it up. So I can say Django.setup, and this should set up and configure the project settings. From here on, next is our fake pop script, or fake population script. So I'm going to import a couple things. I'll import random, and then I will also say from first app.models import, we'll do access record, web page, and topic. And then finally, the library we just downloaded, we'll say from Faker import with a capital F Faker. The naming convention isn't so great there, but that's the way they decided to do it. Then we create an instance of that Faker object. I'll call it fakeGen for fake generation. And then we'll call Faker, close parentheses. And then I'm going to just make a list of topics. So remember the topics, that was a very simple model, so I'll just create those manually. I'll have one topic of websites be search, one topic of websites be social, another one be a marketplace type site, and then finally we'll have news and games. So various topics for different websites. Then we'll create a function that can actually add topics. So say add topic, and this is going to look really similar to using those shell commands. I'll say t is equal to topic.objects. And in this case, I'm going to call the get underscore or create. And what this does is it's either going to retrieve the topic if it already exists in the model or create it. And I'm going to pass in top name is equal to, and I'll say random choice, so the random choice method from the topics list. And then I grab here a 0 because of the way this is formatted back. And to discuss this sort of formatting from get or create a little more is the general format. It's essentially a tuple that returns object and then something that's created. And the first element in the tuple object is a reference to the model instance that this get or create method creates if the database entry wasn't found. And then the entry is created using the parameters that you pass here. And in this case, I'm just saying pick one of these topics as a random choice. And you can check out the official Django documentation if you want more information about this get or create method. But the basic idea here, it's going to return a tuple, and I just want to grab the first object in that tuple, which is that reference to the model instance. So that's why I have to add an additional index of 0 here. Then once I've done that, I'm going to say t.save, as we've done before, and I will then return t. So that's my simple add topic. Now let's show you kind of the more complicated ways for populating access record and web page, which weren't just a simple one word. So I will say def, and we'll just call this populate. And we'll have it a default n to populate with, so the user can then later change that or provide it. We could also make it some sort of command line parameter you can pass in. Right now we'll keep it as, let's say, n equals 5. And what we're going to do is say for entry in range n, first we need to do is get the topic for the entry. So we'll say top is equal to add topic. And then I want to create the fake data for that entry. So I create a fake URL object. So I call fakeGen, which is that instance of faker, and the method for a URL is just .url. Then I need to create some fake dates for that, and that's just, again, fakeGen, and we call date off of that, the date method. And then I need to get a fake name for this website, like a fake company name. So I can call fakeGen dot and then call company off of this. There are a ton of a lot more methods you can call off of this, like fake first name, fake last name, fake credit card, etc. Again, you can explore the documentation if you're interested in those. Right now, that's really all we need. So then I'll create the new web page entry, and I'll create a variable webpg for short for web page, and that will be webpage.objects. And then I'm going to use that getter create again. And then I will specify that for this web page, the topic is equal to top. The URL is equal to that fake URL I generated. And the name of it is equal to that fake name I generated. And again, I need to grab just the first object in that tuple that's returned. So we'll keep that. And then I want to create a fake access record for that web page. So I will say acc underscore rec is equal to access record, again objects, getter create, and I'll supply that the name was the web page, and then date is equal to fake underscore date. And again, I just want that first object. So note, this is going to be a little different on this first parameter, because if you remember back to what the actual models look like, if I click here, for web page, the topic was the foreign key topic. So when I'm actually generating that fake data, notice that instead of passing just some fake topic name, I'm actually grabbing a topic object. So if we go back here, I'm returning t from add topic. So I'm actually returning a topic object, which is why I'm passing it here when I'm saying get or create. And it's the same thing for access records. If we come back here for access record, its foreign key for the name is web page, so it actually belongs here to web page, which means I'm going to pass in the entire web page here. So that web page that I just created, I'm passing it in to the access record because it was a foreign key. So keep that in mind. You can't just pass in a string here if you have it as a foreign key in the models. Okay, next, finally, at the end of all this thing, I'm going to say if main, name is equal to main here, I'm going to print some command like populating script. And then we can say populate. And here you can actually pass in whatever number you want. Remember, the default was 5. We could change it to be 20 if we wanted to. That should be no problem. And then once that's done, we'll say something like population, or we'll say populating complete. Save that. And now it's time to actually test to see if we got this all right. So I'll come back up here, and then I'm going to clear my console. And let's make sure I'm in the right place. So I should be under first project, and I will call Python. Whoops. We'll call, make sure I'm right, Python populate underscore first underscore app dot py. Hit enter. It's populating the script. You see kind of a bunch of stuff here happening with DB SQLite. The higher n value you provide, the more time it will take to generate all that fake data. So keep that in mind. It looks like it all worked. So now let's actually test it. Let's run our website. I will say now Python manage.py run server. It's going to run the server, and let me grab this URL and put it in my browser and bring that browser over. So here's the browser, and then let's say /admin. And if we take a look at this, let's check out the web pages we have. And now here I can see I have a bunch of fake web pages that I just generated and populated. Pretty cool. Come back to access records. Here I have a bunch of fake access records, and you could have limited the access record dates. It doesn't really matter for our use case, but we see that we're able to click on one, check it out, has a name. We could also reassign the name. But now you have a better idea of what a fuller database actually looks like. So here are web pages again. Here are the topics. Remember, the topics are just a few topics, but I could click then social, change it, etc. Okay, that's all we need to know now for population scripts. Hopefully, you'll find them useful when you're working with your own websites. We won't touch on them too often in the future, but keep in mind that we can use them, and that Faker library is hopefully really useful to you. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture. And welcome to the Models, Templates, Views lecture for Django. Django operates on what is known as a Models, Templates, and Views paradigm. It's also called MTV for short, and it encompasses the idea of how to connect everything we've talked about so far. So we've talked about models and databases, we showed a little bit of templates and their tagging, and we've talked about views as well. But how do we actually connect everything? There are a few basic steps to achieving the goal of serving dynamic content to a user based off the connection of those models, views, and templates. Let's walk through these steps. The first step is that in that views.py file, we import any models that we will need to use. The second step is to use the view to query the model for data that we will need. The third step is to pass results from the model to the template. The fourth step is to edit the template so that it's ready to accept and display the data from the model. And then the fifth step is to map a URL to that actual view. We can practice this methodology by changing what we display on the front index page. So to begin our understanding of this entire process, we're going to start by actually generating a table on that index page. The table will display all the web pages and access records from the access record database we created and populated. We'll also be using template tagging to connect the model to that HTML page. This entire process is going to be introducing a lot of new things, so don't be intimidated. The template tagging especially can seem confusing at first. We've already seen a little bit of it with the static images that we use template tagging to inject into the HTML. But again, don't worry if the template tagging seems confusing. We're going to be getting tons of practice with this later on as we develop more clones of websites. After we walk through all of this with some code, you will have a challenge to practice your own MTV skills on your own. Level 3 is going to focus a lot more on expanding this idea of MTV and the mapping URL step. That's step number 5, which we haven't really dived into yet, and we won't focus too much on this particular section of the course. Okay. Let's get started. I'm going to open up my editor and walk through this entire MTV paradigm. Okay, let's get started showing an example of how to actually use MTV paradigm. So I'm going to come over here to First Project, First App, and open up my views.py file. And so far, I had this simple index request that took this dictionary and then used that to actually inject with template tagging the actual content into HTML. We're going to be expanding on this idea by connecting this to the database. So I'm going to say from first app.models, import, and then the 3 models. We had topic, we had web page, and we had access record. And then here in this actual index, and I would change this if I wanted to do a different view, but right now we'll keep things simple, everything on the home page. I'm going to make a variable called web pages list. And this is going to be equal to access record, and then I'm going to call the objects. And then I'm going to call the objects and say order by, which is a method off of these objects, and then order by the date field. So if you're a little confused by that order by, it's a really common SQL command. So you can, if you're used to SQL, that probably feels really natural, but it basically just says order this by that date field or that date column. Then I'm going to create a date dictionary. So we'll say date underscore DICT is equal to, and then I'm going to call the key access record. I'll say access records. And then that web pages list is going to be the actual value for that. So let's get rid of this dictionary. And then finally, I'm going to return render first app / index.html. And then for the context, it's going to be instead of that my dictionary, it will be that date dictionary, date underscore DICT. Okay, so the main things to get across here is that we were in views.py, and that first step, remember, is we had to actually import the models. And then here, I'm going to use render to actually grab stuff from the model itself, and then use template tagging later on to inject it into the HTML. So far we're done with steps 1 and 2, where we imported the models and used the view to query the model for the data we need. Now I'm going to come over to my actual HTML, and that's over here under templates, first app, index.html. And I'm going to essentially clear all of this. This is now going to be the original index.html. So if you open up the Django level 2 files, you'll notice that there's two HTMLs, original index and then index. Right now, I'm going to go with the index. The original index is just everything I deleted. All right, so I said HTML, and then if we're ever dealing with static files, we'll want to load them. We may or may not have them this time, but it's always a good idea to say load static files in case you're going to have them. And then we'll keep the title. We'll say title is Django level 2. And also in the head, let's give the link to the CSS file so we can get used to doing that. So I'll type in link. It's a style sheet. href is going to be an injection here with template tagging. So I'll say static, and then here in quotes, and actually this whole thing needs to be in quotes, so let's make sure that's correct. And I'm going to say, with a closing tag here, static, and then with another set of quotes, CSS, and then whatever it happened to be. I believe it was my style, and we can add that in .css. So we'll save this, and if I expand my static folder, I should see CSS, and there's my style.css. It only changes heading to color red, but we can work with it later on. Okay, so far I've loaded the static files, and I was able to do that to link to my actual CSS file. But what we really want to focus on here is using the template tagging to grab from the view the requested information from the models. So inside the body, I'll say h1, hi, we'll say hi, welcome to Django level 2. And then h2 will say, here are your access records. Probably won't want to do something like this realistically on a website where you just display all the information from your model, but for right now, we're keeping things simple. And I'm going to make a div here, and this class is going to just be Jang2. That way I can grab it later on. Okay, and this is where it's going to look a little strange with the template tagging. I'm going to say here, with the curly brackets and then the %, if access underscore records. So what does that actually mean? Here I'm just checking if I actually have the access records from, if I go back to views.py, right here. So if I actually have this key, then do some stuff. So you can see it's a little bit like Python. It's not quite full Python as far as the syntax, but it's similar. And then I'm going to create a table tag, and then we'll create thead, and then I'll say site name, and then here I will say date accessed. Okay, so those are the basics here. And now what I need to do is actually insert the table rows. And the table rows are going to be connected to the actual model. So I need to somehow add in logic here that loops through every row in the access records. And what that looks like is this. I say for some temporary variable name, we'll say ACC in, and then access records. And this has to match in whatever you had over here in views for the key. So what I'm saying is for this temporary variable in access records, and remember access records is going to be this list of web pages that's ordered by the date from the model. Hopefully here you can begin to see kind of that peak of the iceberg of that MTV, how we're connecting all the moving pieces. And then what I do is I create the table row tag, tr, and I'll create table cell tag, td, and inside of this, now I use the sets of curly brackets with no % because it's not actually logic, it's essentially just injecting text right now. And we'll say acc dot, and then we actually call what we want. So I'll say dot name for the site name, and then again, I'll call acc, and then the actual field I want. In this case, the field is date, because that's how I have it here, site name and then date accessed. And then finally, you have to make sure that whenever you have this for tag, that for loop tag, you end it. So here, I'm going to make sure that we end that by saying end for. Now, that's a little different than anything we've seen in Python, so keep that in mind. And I actually want this whole thing to be inside that closing table tag. So I will save that. And then, since I have this if access records, I need an else to go along with it. So let's add that in, and that's going to be outside of the table. We'll say else. We'll print out a paragraph. No access records found. And then, since I have that if and that else, I need to end it. So we say end if. And then that's the end of the div tag, and that's really all we need here. So I will save that, and then let's check out the urls.py file, make sure that's all linked up. So in their first project, I have urls.py, make sure that's okay. And that all still looks good. It looks like I'm connecting views.index to the home page, so that makes sense. And if I look at my urls.py file in first app, that also makes sense here. Great, so let's see if this actually worked and try it out. Going to say Python, manage.py, run server, hit enter, see if we get any errors here. Okay, no errors, that's a good sign. I'm going to copy and paste this into my browser, and let's bring it over. So bringing it over gets us this. It says, hi, welcome to Django Level 2, here are your access records. And embarrassingly, I spelled your wrong, but hopefully you forgive me. And here I can see that I have the actual table. So let's give a little bit of styling to this table so it's a little bit more readable, and I can do that simply by affecting the CSS. So if I come over here to static, remember I'm loading this actual static, so let's change it up so we get a little bit of color on those table cells. So I will say here table, and then we'll give it a border, let's say 2 pixels, solid black. And if I want to actually give border not just to the outside of the table, but to the table header and table rows, I can put a comma here, th, comma, td. Or, since I actually gave it a class, if I remember correctly, coming up here, so it is Django 2, so let's actually grab this Django 2 class and then add it in. So I'll say .django 2. Let's see if that actually works. Come back here, bring back my actual HTML, or excuse me, refresh the page. And we're getting not found static. Let's come back here to index.html, make sure that was all correct. And I'm missing the %sign to close this, so that should have matched. Okay, now let's save this. Run this again. Control C, Python manage.py run server. Bring back my actual browser. And if I bring it back here, now I see that the heading is also connected, so I probably should have noticed that last time. And I can see here that I have the table with the border. So it looks like I need to actually add in some more. So let's just make it table thtd, save that. We'll refresh the page and restart this. And refreshing that page, now I get these nice double borders. Okay, so hopefully you can begin to see how you've connected everything. Okay, now I wanted to take a little bit of time to discuss how Django can help you debug your code, especially with template tagging, if you ever feel confused on it. So, as you probably just noticed, like even I can confuse the template tagging or actually accidentally make mistakes. The error reporting is actually really good for this sort of thing. So if you come down, you're doing your template tagging and you forgot to write end if. So your code is really long, you had the if statement up here, and typically in Python you don't have to say end if, so you just accidentally forget. Well, if you take a look at what the refresh site looks like after you say end if, I refresh it, and here we already see that I have a template syntax error. And bringing the page over looks something like this. It says unclosed tag if, looking for one of end if. It actually reports back that it's looking for an end if, and if you scroll down, it will actually tell you what it's looking for as far as its match. So it says, hey, this highlighted line, if access records, has no matching end if. And you can see there's an entire trace back here that you can follow as well. So the error reporting is actually really good on the website, so definitely take advantage of that. It will essentially almost always tell you directly what it's looking for. Now, if you don't actually know what this means, then you can always Google search it or search Stack Overflow, and you'll probably find your answer there. Okay, hopefully now you have a better understanding of how to use the MTV paradigm to actually connect your models and inject content into the HTML. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. And welcome to Django Level 2 Project Exercise. We've learned a lot about setting up models, templates, and views, and it's time for you to get some practice. We're going to be using the same Pro 2 project from Django Level 1. So if you don't have that, you can download it from the Django Level 1 folder notes. Or if you want, you can also start from a fresh project. It's up to you. Here's what you have to do starting from a project with an application. I want you to add a new model called a user, and this model should have these fields: a first name field for the user, a last name character field for the user, and then an email field. And make sure to make the migrations as we showed earlier in this section of the course, and then create a script that will populate your database with fake users. Then confirm that the populating worked through the admin interface. Once you've done that, then create a view for your website for the domain extension /users. This /users page will be an HTML list of the usernames and emails, which means if someone goes to your main web page, that index page, they'll just see some heading, whatever you want to show, but when they go to the extension /users, they'll actually see an HTML list of the usernames and emails. And then you're going to be using template tags to actually generate this content from the user model. And remember to change your urls.py file to actually deal with the changes to the user's extension, both in your actual application and in your project. Let's get a quick look at what the final page should actually look like. Alright, so upon launching your website, you should see something like this on the home index page. It says, welcome, go to users to see the list of user information. So then when you start typing /users, hit enter, you should see a generated list where you have numbers saying user info, and then inside there's a nested list with the first name, the last name, and then the email. And all of these first names, last names, and emails have been randomly generated with the Faker library, so they may not match the first name or last name. That's totally okay. It's basically just totally fake data. Alright, so this is what it should look like, and remember, we are dynamically generating this content from the actual models. If you have any questions, feel free to post to the Q&A forums, but other than that, best of luck, and in the next lecture, we'll be coding out through an example solution. I'll see you there. And welcome to Django Level 2 Project Exercise Solutions lecture. In this lecture, we'll be coding through the project exercise solutions and showing you how to do it from scratch, meaning we'll actually start a project and create an application from the very beginning. And the reason for this is that you can later on use this lecture as a reference for everything we've covered, not just in Django Level 2, but Django Level 1 as well. Okay, let's hop over to the editor and get started. Okay, so here I am at my editor, and to get started, I'm going to actually activate my virtual environment. If you want to know what your virtual environments are, you can go to conda info-envs, and this is totally optional. As I mentioned back when we were discussing virtual environments, you don't need to use a virtual environment. It's definitely a good idea, especially if you plan to actually use this the website or application and host it somewhere online, then you definitely want to use a virtual environment. But if you plan on just playing with things locally, it's not a big deal to not use one. Alright, so then I see my Django env, that's the one I want. So I will say activate my Django env. And this is the environment that's using Python 3 and also has Django installed. And then what I'm going to do is actually, under Django lectures, the folder I'm in, I have a folder called Django Level 2. So I will cd to Django Level 2, and I'm just using tab to autocomplete there. And then I'm going to create my project. And remember, we can create a project with the Django admin command line tool. And that basically allows us to just say Django-admin, and then call the start project command, and then whatever you want to name the project. I'll try to keep the names similar to what the actual Django Level 1 secondary project was. It was Pro 2, so we'll keep that. Hit enter, and then it may take a couple of seconds for it to actually create the project files, but it's going to create those files. Here they are. And then we have Pro 2, settings, URLs, and then manage.py. So now let's actually create an application. And we do that with the Python manage.py commands. So I will cd into Pro 2 so I can get access to that actual manage.py file. Now that I'm in the same directory as it, I will call Python manage.py, and then I'm going to call the command start app, and then the name of my application. In this case, we'll just call it something simple, like app2, but again, you can call it whatever you want. And you'll probably want to choose better names than what I'm choosing here, since I'm doing very generic names, so we can kind of tell each single step. And now I have my project, my application, and everything's ready to go. As I continue along, I'm going to need to add something to the settings.py file to let it know where my application is, but I also want to add a templates folder, and we can also later on add a static folder. I'm going to just do this manually. So the way I can do this is right-click on the Pro 2 and say New Folder, and I will call this one Templates. And then inside of Templates, I'm going to create another folder called App2. And then here I'm going to have any templates that relate to Application 2. And for the case of our project exercise, it's going to be two templates. The index.html page, that's the home page, and then the actual users page. So I'll create a new file, and we'll call that users.html. Okay, and we'll deal with actually editing these much later. So I can close them for now. Just make sure they're actually created. And then I want to go to settings.py file. And my next step is to actually make sure that it knows where the templates are. So create that template directory and add it. And also add the application 2 that I made to the settings.py file. So let's walk through that again. For the template directory, I just say template _dir. And we do a very similar process when you have the static directory. Here I'm going to say os.path, join. Remember, we want to use relative path names. And then I'm going to call the base directory and then add on to it templates. So all I'm saying is, okay, go to the base directory, and then a subdirectory of that is this templates folder I just made. So I can save that, and then I'm going to scroll down here to that templates list with a dictionary inside of it. Here it is. And here, under directories, I want to let it know that the variable template _dir is what I'm referencing. So we'll save that. And I always add in a comma just in case. And then scrolling back up, we can see we have installed apps listed. And I want to make sure that it also knows that the application I just made is there. So I will say app2. And we can save that. All right, settings.py should now be good to go. So let's continue. The first thing I like to do is start off with the actual models. So I will come to app2, open up the models, and create them here. So I'll create a user class, and we always inherit from models.model. And then we do the class object attributes, which are the fields. So we have a first name field, and that's going to be models dot, and we'll have that be a character field. And we'll give this a max length constraint of 128. Again, up to you, whatever you want the constraints to be. Last name is also going to be essentially the exact same thing. Max length, we'll set that equal to 128. And then finally, we have the email field. And hopefully you were able to figure out that email field is available to you. And we'll give this a maximum length of a little longer. Let's just say 264. And I also want all the emails to be unique. And the logic behind that is sometimes people share the same first and last name if it's a really common. So for something like John Smith, can be a really common first and last name. We want to make sure that at least our emails are unique. Otherwise, we may have a duplicate in the user base. Okay, so we can save that, and we have our models done. Up next, I want to make sure that I actually have the views for this. So I'll come to app2, views.py. And at first we're using HTTP response, but now we can just use the render function. And remember, I need to actually say from app2.models and import my model. That way I can use it. So now it's time to create a view. Right now we've only known about function views. Later on we'll learn about class-based views. So we have def index that takes a request, is going to be the home page. And I'm just going to return render, take in the request, and then find under templates app2/index.html. And we will save that. Then the next thing I want to do is actually create the view for that users page. So that's going to be def users. That takes in a request. And we're going to have a user list object, which is just going to call the user, grab all those objects, and then we can also call order by on them and order by the first name. You could also just grab all of them, but it's always nice to order them somehow, especially given what we're going to be doing. And we'll talk a lot more about this actual sort of commands of grabbing objects, or excuse me, models for your views. Right now we'll keep things simple. And then finally, we want to create that context dictionary. And here we'll keep it to say users is the key, and then the actual value is user list. Then I'm going to return, and I'll return the render command or render function. And here that's going to be app2 users.html. And then I also want to, first argument should be request. Almost forgot. Okay, request. Now it's app2 users.html. And then for the context, I'll set it equal to that dictionary we just created, user_dict. Save that, and now we have our views created. So we have the homepage view and the actual users view. So the user view right now is going to grab all the objects from user, order them by their first name, and it sets up that dictionary users for this user list. So we can actually return that and then grab stuff from it. So we're ready to go on this front. Up next, what we have to do is actually set up the URL files. So let's actually, underneath our app2, create the urls.py file we'll be using. So we'll create a new file under app2 urls.py. Remember, we have URLs for the actual application and then URLs across the entire project. So this is what it looks like across the entire project, and then this is what it looks like in the application. So right now, the application URLs is going to be quite simple. We'll just say from django.config.urls, import URL, and then from app2, import those views. Then we'll create a URL patterns list, and here we will just call the URL function, and then using regular expressions, we'll say caret and then the $, and we will call views.users, and we will assign it the name users. That way we can call it later. And I've been using the word users a lot, so maybe in your own applications you won't want to have so many names doubled up. But for something this simple, where we have users.html directly related to the users view here, and then I'm naming this users, that's okay for now since it's pretty simple and straightforward. Not a whole lot of applications or views, but later on you may want to hone in on unique names. So if you come back to this later, it makes more sense to you. Okay, so now it's actually time to edit the URLs in the project. And again, remember there's kind of 3 distinct ways to do this. Right now we haven't learned about class-based view yet, but we know about function views. So the way to do that, we'll show you the simplest way, is you just say from app2 import views, and then what we can do here, for instance, for the home page, is say URL, and since that's going to be the home page, we'll just say caret $, and then call views.index, and then we say the name index here, comma. And then the other way is using this include function that we haven't imported in, so let's actually do that first. So we can import include as another way to do this, and we'll do that for the users. So we'll say URL, and then we'll say regular expression here, caret users, slash, so now anything slash users comes here, and then I call include, and then pass in app2.urls. Save that, and then we should be good to go. Okay, let's check to see if we actually got everything working correctly by migrating the models to actual databases. So here we're going to call Python manage.py and then call migrate. We'll hit enter. And here we can see the migration happening, so that looks good. And then we need to register those changes to our application. So we'll say Python manage.py, make migrations, and then the actual application name. In our case, it's app2. So we'll run that as well. And it looks like it created the model user. And then finally, we need to rerun those migrations. So we'll say manage, Python manage.py, migrate one more time, hit enter. It's applying those changes, and we should be good to go. Now, if we actually want to use the admin interface with this model, we need to tell the admin that it's there. So I'm going to go to my admin.py file. Right now, there's nothing there. But what I'm going to say is from my app, so in this case, it's app2.models, import, and then I'm going to import, in this case, the only model I have, user, and then say admin.site register, and I will register that model with the admin interface. Okay, so we should have everything ready to go. Let's make sure, and we'll actually try running the server here. So we'll say Python manage.py run server, hit enter, and let's see if we actually get everything working. Okay, so I'm going to copy and paste this, put it in my browser, and bring it over. If you just ran that, you should have a blank page, so that's actually pretty good. Let's make sure that it's working by calling admin off of this. And here we have admin, so that's also working, but we haven't actually created a super user for the admin, so let's do that now. But it looks like the basics is working. We can do Control-C to kill that. Let's create a super user and actually put something on the index page. So we'll do that first. I'll type HTML on this index page and then give a heading 1. Just say working. That way it's not totally blank and I know something's there, that everything's actually connecting. And then let's add in that super user. And then remember, again, we do this with the manage.py file. Like I said, we're calling manage.py file a lot whenever we're working with Django. And then I'm going to create super user. Should ask me for my username. We'll say Jose is my username. Anything you want for the email address is fine. Just make sure you remember these. Otherwise, you have to create another super user. And then finally, I'm going to put a weak password in. Test password. Test password. Okay, super user created successfully. Looks like everything's good. Okay, now that I've created the super user of the admin, let's actually make sure everything has been registered. So let's call Python manage.py migrate. Hit enter. No migrations to apply, so that's good. All right, now that we've created the super user and checked those migrations again, we should be able to run the server. So let's call Python manage.py run server, run it, and then bring in my browser with this. So I'm going to bring that in. Looks like it's working. So we'll go to /admin, hit enter, enter your username and whatever your password was. Log in. And here I see under app 2, if I expand this a little bit, I have users. So I could come here to users. I have 0 users. User is kind of a poor choice here because it's already under authentication and authorization. Now, the site admin page does separate it out by application, so you don't have to worry about mixing your users that use your website versus these users in this application. But again, keep in mind, probably call them something else. If I want to add a user, I can click add here. I'll give them the first name. So we'll say John Smith as the last name, and then an email can say jsmith@yahoo.com or whatever. And then let's just save this person. And now we have one user object there. Great. So now what I'm going to do is zoom out a little bit. I'm going to log out. Thanks for spending some quality time with the website today. And let's close this and then do Control-C to shut down that server. Looks like everything is working so far. Let's actually populate the database now. So what I'm going to do is under Pro2, I'll create a population script. I'm going to create a new file and we will call it populate_users.py. And there's a couple things we need to do first. First, I need to import OS here. And then I need to configure the settings for this project. So I need to say os.environ for environment, set default. And then I need to actually set the default Django settings module. So that's going to be Django settings module, and then point it to wherever my project settings file is. In this case, it's just pro2 settings.py. So here I just say pro2.settings. Okay, once that's set up as a default, so again, that's configuring the settings for the project, I can just import Django itself and then call Django.setup. And that's what's going to allow us to actually go in and populate the database. Next, I'm going to import, actually I don't believe we'll be needing random, so that's fine. We'll say from app2.models, import the user model, that class. And then I'm also going to say from faker, import faker. I'll create a fake gen object equal to faker. And then let's begin this. I will start off by creating a function called def populate. Has some n value, it takes in, let's put the default as 5. And we'll say for entry in range n. Let's kind of minimize this a little bit so we have a little more space to code. Now I'm going to collapse the directory just for now. Create a couple more lines here. So again, for entry in range n, I'm going to create the fake data. So I'll start off by creating a fake name, which we can just say off of fake gen dot name. And then I'm going to split that name. So it's a string of words, and I want to split it on the white space. And that way, the first thing I get out, which is the fake first name, is equal to fake name 0. And then similarly, we can say fake last name is equal to fake name 1. Then finally, let's create a fake email for this user. That's going to be fake gen email. Now we create a new entry in our actual database. I'll create user, call user, dot objects, dot get underscore or create. And here I just pass in the first name is equal to that fake first name I just made. Fake first name, there it is. And then, whoops, the last name is going to be equal to the fake last name I just made. And then finally, the email. Let's actually put this on some newer lines. The email is going to be equal to that fake email that I just made. And then remember, this returns an object, so I need to grab from 0 in order to do that kind of tuple unpacking. And at the end of all this, we'll just say if, almost had it, if name is equal to main, I'm going to print populating data bases. And let's actually run populate. We can leave it with, let's say, let's just pass in 20 so we get some values there. And then we'll print complete. Save that, and let's hope we didn't make any mistakes here and actually run this. So we'll say Python, and then we're going to say populate users.py. We'll hit enter, let's see if this runs. It's populating databases, and it's complete. Great. So now let's actually run that server again and make sure it's all working. Call Python, manage.py, run server, hit enter, bring in my browser. And then in my browser, we'll go to the admin site. So we'll say /admin, log in, go to users, and here I can see I have a bunch of user objects. Perfect. So I didn't actually give any names to these user objects, but we see we have a first name, last name, and email. That's all we need, so we're going to log out. Close this. And finally, we have to do the template tagging to actually get those lists. So I'm going to do Control-C here, and then come to index.html. Working is fine. Let's just say h2, go to /users to see the user list. Save that, and then under users.html, this is where we're going to be using the template tagging. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to say users is the title of this. And I know you're probably sick of even seeing the word user, so feel free to change it to whatever you want. And I'll create a heading saying, here are your users of this application. We'll say for app2. And then now it's time for the template tags. And again, don't let this confuse you or intimidate you. First, we need to check if users. And that's going to check if there's even a user's key in that dictionary. So if I come back to views here, it's going to check, hey, does this user dictionary that I'm passing in as context, if it has this key, then actually do something. So now coming back to users.html, if users, and it's always nice to, whenever you say an if, right away, write its end if, so you make sure not to forget that. And this is all going inside the body. Let me collapse this a little bit. So we're saying if users, we have its end if already. And then what we're going to do is, if that exists, we'll have an OL here, and we'll say, we'll create a for loop that says for person in users, create a list, and say user info. And then inside of this list will be an unordered list, so we have a nested list, and then we have the list items. So it'll be a first name, and then here we're using template tagging to call person dot and then the actual field we want. In this case, we want the first name field, and then we'll call last name. And remember, I'm just using this template tagging of double sets of curly brackets because it's essentially just injecting text. So we'll say last name. It's not actually any sort of logic. And finally, we'll say email. And we'll say person.email. Save that. And remember, I have a for. So what I need to do is end this for and choose the appropriate location, which is going to be after all these list commands for these unordered lists. So let's try that out. We'll say end for. Save that. And now let's run our server again and make sure that page actually is working. Paste Python, manage.py, run server, hit enter, bring in that page. And it looks like this is working, so let's actually try to go to users now. See if that's connected. And here they are. Here are users for your app. We have Brittany Daniels, etc., Cheryl, all these emails dynamically generated based off the model. And that's what you had to do for Project 2. And hopefully this served as a great review of everything we've done so far in the Django section of this course. We learned how to create a project, create the application, link the URLs, create the models, create the views, do the template tagging, and make everything work together. And so far, this is everything you can do with the models, templates, and views. Coming up in the next couple levels for Django, we'll talk about using template tagging in better ways, and then also talking about forms. So actually getting user input. So if someone visits your website, how can they save information through forms? All right, thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next level of Django.